Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to. Lots to talk about. The beginning of the Chauvin murder trial should be depressing. It should be angering. But we'll see where this gets us. He up on, I think, second-degree murder, unintentional second-degree murder charges, with a third-degree murder charge and also manslaughter, which will give the jurors an interesting array of options. I don't know how you look at that video and come to any other conclusion. I would have gone with a much higher charge than unintentional second, but that's going to be there. So we'll see how this is going to play out. Some of the early testimony, the police dispatcher who called the police on the police, damning stuff. Also good news, Joe Biden said that 90% of U.S. adults will be vaccinated by April 19th. I hope that's true because I'm still waiting on the list. They tell me I'm on a list, and maybe that list will come before the 19th. But some good news. I mean, overall, the country moving in the right direction. At least we believe it is. The most recent ABC Ipsos poll out has Biden's approval of handling the pandemic at 72%, much, much higher than the former guy. How he's handled the vaccine distribution, 75%, which is, and look, I think they've done a fantastic job. 58 days, they got to 1 million, or 100 million. And in the first 100, they're saying 200 million people. So that is impressive. Also on the economy, people are very happy with where things are heading, where we're going. 60% of folks give Biden a thumbs up on how he has handled the economy, with 60% saying the country is on the right track. Now remember, it wasn't long ago, January 21st, when Biden first day on the job, it was the country's on the right track, 29% of us. So massive jump under his leadership. The last guy, he peaked even when things were incredibly wonderful. As my former guy supporters love to tell me, was only 56%. So heading hopefully in the right direction. Good stuff. And this week they're going to roll out their infrastructure plan, which is something I think desperately needed. And I think we'll jump that 60% number up even higher, because there's virtually nobody I talk to who doesn't go, yeah, we kind of do need to invest in infrastructure. We kind of do need to rebuild some stuff. I was driving through a town here in Pennsylvania, and I'm not gonna call them out, but I'm driving through town, and literally, I in my Jeep, I barely could stay in the seat. I mean, I was banging around like a pinball, stuff flying off the seats, and anybody who's driven with me knows I've got stuff all over the place because I work a lot out of my car. So, just stuff just banging all over the place, it's terrible. And I'm going, yeah, we kind of need to something. So I'm looking forward to the rollout of what they're saying is a massive infrastructure proposal that's going to happen this week. Now, what I do love is I love immediately the right wing lost their mind. Over the weekend, all I saw was Grover Norquist and his group losing their mind that Joe Biden's going to raise your taxes. And what he was complaining over is Pete Buttigieg had said that they're looking at the potential of a per mile driving tax. They're looking at a usage fee. The more you use it, the more you pay for it. It's what our entire system is set up on to begin with, only we don't know it. Most of us don't seem to understand that there's a gas tax and put on every gallon of gasoline, and that's what is supposed to be used to fund our roads and bridges. Now, when we were getting 12 to 15 miles a gallon, there was a lot of money. When cars started getting 20, 30, 40 miles to a gallon, when you start seeing electric cars coming that get, unlimited miles to the gallon, there's nothing left to fund the roads and bridges. So they're trying to figure out how they keep that spirit of a user fee. The more miles you drive, the more you pay for the right to use it, without it being too incredibly onerous. And that's going to be a challenge because people aren't going to want to get a bill every month for you drove X amount of miles. Here's your bill. That's going to be something ugly. Now they've moved away from it, but the right wing jumped all over it. See, Joe Biden's going to raise your taxes. No, they were switching, but that's hard to explain. Not even something that I would want to. Not even the kind of mental gymnastics that I would want to try and engage in, because you're going to lose. But it is still a user fee. But they've pulled it out. Going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Any discussion of possibly raising taxes is automatically a losing proposition somehow. So it's one of those things that I'm interested to see how it plays itself out. So there is that. And for me, the infrastructure plan, something that I've been looking forward to, because this could create millions of good-paying jobs, could move our economy in a really great direction, and help us in ways that, I think back to my grandparents' generation and the economic boom that came out of it. Something really good. As long as we make those jobs good-paying union jobs with prevailing wage. And doing it in ways that lift conditions as opposed to tearing them down, I think it's a great thing. So we're going to talk about that this week, obviously, because that's going to be the big news, and I'm hoping it slides through. Now, again, it's going to come down to a couple of Democrats. It's going to come down to Joe Manchin, who should be overwhelmingly thrilled about this, because you could build West Virginia. I'm not going to say rebuild. I'm going to say build West Virginia. You could help them grow, and this would be a huge thing for not just Joe Manchin, but for the people of the state. Jobs, lots of them, good ones. So good stuff. Now, over the weekend, because you've got Joe Biden taking care of the virus, says by April 19th, 90% of the adults are going to be vaccinated, doing really well in the economy, rebuilding our country, doing the yeoman's work. Showing up every day with his jelly bucket, putting on his work gloves, rolling up the sleeves, getting to work. We've got Republicans who, they've got nothing. There are no plans coming out of them. There are no, hey, let's do this instead. There's none of that. All there is division and destruction. All there is gamesmanship. And I look at Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz. Texas, do something about the face of your state. Evidently, Ted Cruz went down to the border. I remember the last couple of times Ted Cruz went down to the border. It was about building that wall. Made a big show of it, big daylight thing. This time, showed up at midnight. Kind of reminded me of like the Blair Witch Project. Kind of reminded me of like an evil the Crikey guy. Steve Irwin, you remember him? Kind of reminded me like of a combination of Blair Witch and Crikey, only really creepy. So he's down at the border, and the video that made the rounds, and I got to share it because it's just plain ridiculous in the way it is. Here's our boy Ted Cruz. Listen to what old Ted has got to say. This is just incredible.
So it's past midnight. I'm standing on the shore of the Rio Grande. The water is right behind me. I'm down on the Texas border along with 18 senators. We made the trip to see the crisis that is playing out. We've already gone to detention facilities that are overrun, many of them with families, small children. We saw multiple mothers who were nursing infant babies who had just crossed over and were being housed in outdoor holding pens where they were sleeping on the floor and nursing their babies.
Just, I look at this and I'm going, just crazy. Now he cares. My first thought is, now he cares? Infant babies. Oh, I got to tell you, my heartstrings. Honestly, I thought he was going to start asking for money like those infomercials. I thought this was 3:00 in the morning. I thought maybe Ted had got thrown out of Congress and was, doing the Sally Struthers thing. I can't tell you how angry I was when I watched that. And I spent a couple of times. I've watched it a couple of times. I watched some of the other clips of his safari adventure on the Texas border, because now he seems to care about the infant babies. He cares about the nursing mothers in pens. He cares about the crisis. Where the hell was Ted Cruz the last 4 years? I mean, look, if he was one of the guys who was down on the border with AOC and the rest of them pointing out the atrocities and pointing all of this stuff out, I would say, you know what, good on you, Ted Cruz. But he was on the other side of this, and don't forget that. And my problem is what's going on is the Republican Party is doing their foolhardy best to rewrite the history of our country. They're trying to rewrite in ways that, you got to give them credit, because they're used to it. They get away with it all the time because they know that we as a country have historical amnesia. We just don't seem to get it. But I'm looking through this and I'm going, wow, do people buy this? And I was reading through some of the comments, and interestingly enough, the former guy's supporters and supporters of Ted Cruz are like, good on you, Ted. Thanks for bringing awareness to this horrible tragedy that Joe Biden has caused. Joe Biden's been president for just over 2 months. Now, I'm not putting all the blame on Donald Trump, but a lot of it. So for Magellan here, otherwise known as Ted Cruz, to now proclaim that he's discovered some horrible tragedy, some crisis, it's either he's the most disingenuous person you're ever going to meet, or he's soulless. And I'm going with soulless. In fact, the entire Republican Party at this point are hypocrites and soulless. You had Susan freaking Collins down on the border spewing the same kind of line. Where was Mother Collins the last 4 years? Where was she in standing up to Donald Trump? Oh, that's right. She wasn't anywhere. Now, look, I'm not saying this is one party or the other party's fault. It's both parties' fault. It's Congress's fault. Ted Cruz has no business being on the border. Those 18 senators have no business being down there. They've already made too much of a political sham out of it already. They should get their behinds back to Washington, pass legislation, and fix this mess. A mess that they have created. And then they go, oh, it's Joe Biden's fault. Get the out of here. And take Ted Cruz with you. Also over the weekend, some more rewriting of history. Laura Ingraham had, I guess everybody had the former guy on the show over the weekend on Fox. But Laura Ingraham asked Trump if he was concerned. You concerned? The U.S. Capitol after January 6th has become a fortress, protecting the Capitol from the people, not the people surrounding themselves with the razor wire from us. And of course, here's a giant softball. He goes, well, it's a disgrace. It's disgraceful. It looks for the world to watch. Absolutely. It's a political maneuver, he says. And this is where it gets good. The former guy, I can't even do my Trump anymore. And I don't even want to, which is why I'm not playing the clip. He said there was zero threat right from the start. It was zero threat, Trump said. Some of them went in and they are hugging and kissing the police and the guards. They had great relationships. A lot of people were waved in. And they walked in and they walked out. I'll tell you, he said, I'll tell you. They're doing things. They're persecuting those people. We've done a complete, not just 360 a couple times around and then a 180. We're spinning in the wrong direction because evidently, according to Trump, the people who committed treason, the seditionists, the insurrectionists, the people who were stabbing these people that they were supposedly hugging with flags and beating them in the head with fire extinguishers, they're being persecuted. They're the victims now. The Republicans have turned the victim card into, oh my God, the victims. They're the victims in all this. And here's the thing. I don't know what passes for affection in the Trump family. I don't. But stabbing someone with an American flag or hitting them with a fire extinguisher is not affection. It's not a hug. It's not kisses. Again, I've heard horror stories that Fred Trump treated him terribly, and maybe hitting him with a fire extinguisher instead of kissing him was the sign of affection. I don't know. But I got to tell you, this can't happen. If I'm Joe Biden, and the world was going crazy when Joe Biden didn't call on Fox News during the press conference, I would never call on Fox News. Never, ever, ever, because, well, the fact that you call yourself a news station and you put propaganda and revisionist history on your airwaves and then claim to be fair and balanced. Give me a blanking break. Now, to solidify that point, even Fox News says they're not news. In their lawsuit, because they're being sued for $1 gazillion because of their misrepresentations during the campaign against the voting machine companies, they themselves say they're not news, that they are entertainment. And I got to tell you, and this is where, I like to be entertained like anybody else. But rewriting one of the worst moments in our country's history to turn the people who committed the crimes into victims is not entertainment. It's disgraceful, it's despicable, and it should not be on our airwaves. And they certainly should never get a question, ever, to the President of the United States. Sad, sad stuff. And I'll tell you, it's infuriating to watch what these people have gotten away with. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
Nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day the U.S. Supreme Court issued its ruling on the case West Coast Hotel versus Parrish. The ruling upheld a progressive-era Washington state law that established minimum wages for women. An example of protective legislation, it intended to guard health, safety, and morals of women workers. Elsie Parrish had been a chambermaid at the Cascadian Hotel in Wenatchee, Washington until 1935. She sued and won at the state level after she was paid far below the state's minimum wage. The parent company, West Coast Hotel, appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. They argued the progressive-era law violated the constitutional right of individuals to freely contract with one another. This interpretation was common during the court's Lochner era. The 1905 Lochner v. New York ruling against maximum hours for bakers ushered in a period of anti-labor Supreme Court rulings. Parrish is considered the landmark case that brought an end to that era. The court argued that the Constitution does not speak of freedom of contract and added, quote, the exploitation of a class of workers who are in an unequal position with respect to bargaining power is not only detrimental to their health and well-being, but casts a direct burden for their support upon the community. What these workers lose in wages, the taxpayers are called upon to pay. The case is also considered instrumental in the switch in time to save 9. It was a reference to Justice Owen Roberts' surprising shift in favor of Parrish. This occurred just as President Roosevelt finalized plans to increase the number of Supreme Court justices to 15. Though Parrish did not overturn Lochner, it did mark a period of pro-labor rulings. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So a federal lawsuit has been filed in Georgia, and that didn't take long, as predicted. And nor it should have been the moment that Brian Kemp signed it. It should have been signed, smack, lawsuit. It should have been that quick. But there are a number of groups in Georgia that have filed a federal lawsuit on SB 202, which, again, the most despicable of despicable. And look, exactly what the GOP is all about. Suppressing people's right to vote, high barriers to getting to that voting block, and, of course, making it that much harder. I'm here to share some thoughts on the lawsuit and what they hope to get out of this. I've asked Aunna Dennis to come talk with us. Aunna is the executive director of Common Cause Georgia, their website, commoncause.org/Georgia. Aunna, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me.
So you guys filed this lawsuit. Had to do it, right? I mean, there's no way that this is palatable.
Yeah, it was definitely unavoidable because of the type of things that these bills are trying to do to really suppress voters in Georgia. So definitely a lawsuit was coming. We tried advocating and giving different solutions, but it seems like there was just a conflict of not wanting to meet of the minds and really to make voting more accessible and making options to the ballot box happen for all voters in Georgia. So a lawsuit had to come.
Yeah. So now this bill is huge. I mean, there's a lot to this. Walk us through real quick what exactly Brian Kemp and the Republicans in Georgia did in this SB 202, point by point, if you can.
Yeah. So I'll just let you know, it's 95 pages of bill language. For one thing, this bill started off as 2 pages. And then what they did was they took all these different pieces of trying to suppress voters down to not allowing for line warming. And that's something where you're really kind of cheering people on, giving them ponchos, giving them umbrellas, giving them water, and maybe a chip or granola bar or a kind bar here and there. So they can have provisions while they're in line, and that's been stripped. They say, oh, well, we've given you more early voting days, which is actually not accurate. They made it so that early voting can happen only through a certain time block that literally does not fit into people's work schedule. So 9 to 5 p.m., maybe depending on your county discretion, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. They've removed the creativity of having mobile voting precincts. Now it's that you can't just have them to be accessible to go around your county because a lot of people are still sheltered in place in Georgia. They want it so where it has to replace a brick and mortar actual precinct, and it has to be within, I think, 2,600 feet of the former precinct that cannot be used because of emergency purposes. They're also trying to change the composition of our election boards, where that means that it can be swayed by a different party. And I don't believe that parties belong in our election process. It should be a nonpartisan process to do elections in Georgia. They also want to take over our Secretary of State's office and remove the responsibility of elections from the Secretary of State's office and actually have control over all of our board of elections. And then they want to make sure that if you're trying to do down ballot voting, meaning if you're trying to vote for the person who is going to be your county solicitor, the person who's going to be your tax assessor, the person who's like on your school board, or even down to someone who's saying if you have stop signs in your neighborhood, they're basically saying, hey, if you're voting out of precinct after 5 p.m., you lose the right for all of those contests to be counted. So there's a lot of things just wrong with this bill. And what we've been told is that they want to ensure election integrity, But what we know is that they're trying to fix the big lie. And the big lie is that our elections was rigged,
Right.
and that there was fraudulent things that happened. And we know in Georgia, it just didn't happen.
Right.
So
No, what they
they're
want,
really-
what they want is
Yeah.
they want to find 12,000 votes. That's what they want.
You said it, and that's true. I do. I'm glad you said it, because I would love to just say it plain like that, but that's why we have you, Rick, to put it out there like that. But that's definitely what this is about. This is about making sure that they can consolidate power for a particular party, for a particular president who is just really upset that they can't believe they're lost. And I think they should really check their narcissism around that. And so they're trying to make sure they can find that 12,000 votes around different parts of the state. And they're trying to do it by consolidating power of local elections being controlled by a legislature that is very heavily controlled by one party.
Right.
They're trying to make sure they can change the rules and make sure that, things that would be illegal will now be illegal with this bill. So we had to go to litigation because to make sure that we can have provisions that make it so that Georgia elections is accessible to all voters in Georgia, and that people have options to the ballot box, not just the options that they want at the ballot box.
And what's interesting is, I talk to supporters of the former guy often, and they want people to be able to vote. When you sit and talk to them one-on-one, they believe that every citizen should have the right to have access to the ballot box. It's when you get into this groupthink and you look at something like SB 202, which is really the wet dream list of the GOP. Then they start getting into this groupthink. Well, oh no, there was all this fraud, and the reality is they didn't bring any of that into court. And I tend to.
But they
not
tried
listen.
to bring it to court with 61 cases, and they found nothing in 61 cases around the country.
Right,
There was no fraud.
It's not even they didn't find anything. My problem is that the lawyers, and this is why I love lawyers, because when they go into court, they know they can't lie. Because if they do, the courts don't like that. So they didn't bring in all of the things that Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and the rest of the cavalcade of crazy were spewing at their kangaroo courts, all of the conspiracy theory, all of the fake false allegations. They didn't bring that into the court of law. And for me, I worry about what'd you say in court? What'd you say when you put your hand on the Bible? Say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help me God. They didn't say any of that stuff. So for me, all of that stuff's all BS. It's what they said in court. No fraud.
And like you said, they didn't bring all that kangaroo mess into the courts because they wanted to make sure they could make a mockery and a circus of how people would actually be able to vote and how we interacted with our legislatures. So they did their circus tours around the country, doing all these different types of hearings. But then we have in Georgia that there's no transparency around these laws being enacted, around these bills being signed. We had multiple times where we're getting amendments to this bill or previous bills, and we're getting them an hour before the hearing. And then they're still not live, meaning up on the website for public viewing.
Right.
And so sometimes in hearings, you have legislators say, what are we actually voting on today? What are we actually hearing about today? So like you said, this is a dream list of what the GOP party wanted to do anti-suppression tactics. This bill is definitely that, and we're definitely seeing parts of it domino across the country.
Yep, where I'm at in Pennsylvania, there's talk of a lot of the same things. We haven't gone as far yet as Georgia went with barring people from handing out water while standing in long lines, which I think is just particularly cruel. It's one of those things where you go, yeah, you're standing in line for 10 hours to vote. No water, no granola bar, nothing for you. It's particularly cruel.
And I want to tell people, I'm like, do they not know how hot it gets in Georgia, how sticky it gets in our swamp area, how it rains? We have hurricane season. That's all of October, which is all of our early voting time. Do they not know
No, they don't care.
means to voters?
You're missing the point. They don't care. Because that's in an area where poor people live. Poor people are the ones who stand in long lines. The wealthier areas have plenty of machines. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and they have way too many. And I always say to people that it's not about that. The GOP will say, oh, we do want people to vote. But no, what they're really saying is we want the 1% to vote. We want people who have certain means to be able to vote. We want people who have these different types of multitudes of reliable transportation that can go to this side of town to 30 minutes away. Other folks, if you're a day laborer, if you're a healthcare worker, if you're like me, I'm a working mom, you have to plan your schedule around all these different types of things that you may not have flexibility to get to one polling site and then go to another polling site. And so you may depend on weekend voting, or you may depend on casting your vote by mail, which they're creating more requirements for that, which is something that they enacted 15 years ago, and it was working perfectly fine.
No, I'm in
So
favor. I'm a big
everybody-
fan of the mail-in voting now. I did it in the last election. It worked great. I contacted my local elections office. They said, hey, they sent me the ballot. I filled it out. I stuck it back in the little secret envelope, sealed it, stuck it in the little travel envelope, signed it, dropped it in the box at the elections office. They sent me an email, said, hey, we got it. You're all good. I'm like, that was easy. I didn't have to stand in line. I didn't have anybody breathing on me. I didn't have anybody,
But obviously now they have a problem with it.
And well, it's because they lost. Now let me ask you this, because I saw that you, in this lawsuit, you named as a defendant the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, or Perger, as my friend Greg Pallas likes to point out. Why wasn't he courted to be one of the plaintiffs? Because he really got thrown under the bus. This is basically stripping his office of the power to do this. Did anybody ever reach out to him? Because I think he's the one who got thrown under the bus in this whole thing by the Republicans.
I think that I can't speak to that because I'm not a litigator. I am a plaintiff. But I think that in Georgia, the GOP party is having a culture shift, and they're really trying to figure out who they are. What do they stand for, especially when you have a state that I would say is magenta right about now, so it can go red or blue. So they're really trying to figure it out. And we've seen since our primaries in June that there's a lot of infighting. And for me, I'm an election nerd. I love looking at politics and all that good stuff. So it's just really funny to watch them all throw each other under the bus, because that's what they're doing.
Yep.
However, I wish I could take the bus of suppression and roll it out of Georgia and put it somewhere that doesn't exist.
So let me ask you this, because, obviously we were against what the Republicans have done here. There are some people who believe they have valid claims, and nobody wants there to be any allegations or impropriety in our electoral system. Is there a way that we can address some of the concerns, no matter how fake they are, no matter how unprovable they are? Is there a way to create a system where we do have the accountability that a lot of people are concerned about?
I believe so. And I think that in Georgia, so we had 3 recounts. We had an auditing process. We had multiple investigations into our elections. But we also have things like election board meetings, county commission meetings, where communities can actually be a part of the process and hear what's actually happening with their elections. So I do think it's a little bit of we advocate together and we work together to make sure that we can have this election integrity and we can have this transparency to our elections. So I do think it's definitely doable, but I do think it takes the will of the people, the cooperation of county election boards, and also having a state that's pro-voter and not against the voter accessibility to the balloting options.
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of this, look, I don't want, my problem is I fear that we get to a place in this country where we no longer respect the outcome at the ballot box. And it becomes now this kind of, we're constantly tearing each other apart. Instead of deciding at the ballot box, we have to decide in a different way, whatever that looks like. I believe in the sanctity of the ballot box. I believe that has to be the final word. And that's how we continue this wonderful experiment of self-governance.
Yeah, I totally agree with you with that. I think that in Georgia, we are struggling with the moral conscience of what does it mean for folks to go to the ballot box and what those options, what does that accessibility means? And I think we struggle here with like I said, there's certain people who just don't want everybody to go
Right.
and vote. They don't.
So last line of questioning I've got for you, because there's a lot of people, let's say in my position, I'm a middle-class white male. I live in a suburb. I have transportation. I've never had, in my moment right now, I am not in a position where I can't show my ID. I can't drive to the polling place. I can't make plans to fit into my day. I can rearrange my work schedule if I need to. Walk me through the voters that you're talking about, that someone like me, I don't see, I don't know what their challenges are. Because I think especially a lot of middle-class voters don't understand how difficult some of these changes are going to be on people living in inner cities that aren't on the bus line, that don't have a car at their disposal, that don't have the ability to change their schedules around. So if you could walk me through that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple examples. There are voters that I literally talked to in June as I was monitoring a precinct that was an early voting site, one of the largest one in Southwest Atlanta. It's actually the one that me and my family go to. And there were some voters there who requested an absentee ballot. It never came on time. They did their application. They never received it. And so they were actually healthcare workers who were stationing in North Carolina because they're helping out, because we had this need of people going to where the emergency is because of COVID. And so they told me, I had to drive back 6 hours from the Charlotte area because I never received my absentee ballot. So that's that type of voter, because they're not going to be in Georgia they weren't going to be there for election day. So they had to come back to vote early voting. I had to do that when I was a college student, that I couldn't receive my absentee ballot at a P.O. box. So I was in school in Roanoke, Virginia. So I had to drive with my friends. We caravan 7 hours to actually go vote in person.
Good on you.
Then you have to, yeah.
The
way to spend my fall break. And then there's the voters who are older, who could have surrendered their license, or a person who could be a military veteran who may have a brain injury, who no longer drives. So they may not actually have a license at this point in time.
Yeah.
And they've surrendered those things. And so they may not have the proper ID to actually get to show at a precinct.
Right. So there are millions of people who have all of these things, and I think being able to understand that and empathize with that, I think that's the first part of this. But Aunna, I appreciate you taking some time. I hope the lawsuit goes in the right direction, and as this continues, we'd love to have you come back and share some thoughts with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good stuff. Aunna Dennis. She is the executive director there of Common Cause Georgia. Make sure you check out their website, commoncause.org/Georgia. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1948. That was the day that the labor movement came literally to the doorstep of Wall Street. The United Financial Employees Union went out on strike. The union was started in 1941 by Merritt David Keefe, a page who had worked on the stock exchange trading floor. Keefe had grown up too poor to finish high school. He had gone to Wall Street in the hope of finding wealth and financial security. Instead, he found long hours and low-paying work. He decided the only way to change things was to form a union. By 1946, the union had grown to 5,000 members. Keefe described their platform, calling for a general overall minimum increase of 25% in the salaries of Wall Street employees, job security, benefits of a pension fund, and, in addition, a bonus computed on the volume of trading. Negotiations drug on. Finally, 1,100 union members walked out on strike against both the New York Stock Exchange and the New York Curb Exchange. 500 members of the Seafarers Union supported the exchange workers' cause. The first day of the strike was peaceful, but the next morning, the police told the strikers they could not picket the main entrance of the stock exchange. One 19-year-old woman refused to go across the street. The police reacted by grabbing her and arresting her. Outraged, the picketers rushed to her aid. Some attempted to lie down in the entrance to block the exchange. The police wielded batons, hospitalizing 2 strikers and arresting more than 40. Sadly, the strike ended in defeat in April, as 100 workers lost their jobs because of their involvement. The workers had lost the Battle of Wall Street, the first and only strike at the exchange. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So last week we recognized Equal Pay Day. And interestingly enough, I received some pushback from a few women about my assertion that every day is Equal Pay Day when you're covered by a union contract. They suggested, and I have taken that suggestion to heart, they suggested that as a privileged white male, that I should educate myself in the obstacles that women face in the workplace. And they sent me an article that my next guest had been part of. That's why I have reached out to Judith Levine to come talk with us. She's an associate professor of sociology and the director of the public policy lab at Temple University. She's also the author of Ain't No Trust: How Bosses, Boyfriends, and Bureaucrats Fail Low-Income Mothers and Why It Matters. Judith, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks, Rick, for having me on.
So I'm a privileged white male. I don't understand what women go through. Needless to say, my mother was a single mother in the 70s, and it was not easy. So I do have a perspective. But as a union guy, I'm going to throw it right out from the start. I do think if more women and more workers were in unions, we wouldn't have these problems.
Well, I think that unions are certainly helpful to protect workers of many stripes. So I support you on that. But I don't think it solves every problem in terms of women's inequality in the workforce.
So what I'm hoping you're going to do, because I recognize my privileged status as a white male, what is it that we don't know? Help us understand better what women go through in the workplace. So
there are many reasons that women earn less than men, and on average, women do earn 82.3% of what men do. So for every dollar a man earns, a woman earns 82 cents. That's gone up over time, so there's progress, but still there's a gap. A big part of that is because women do go into different occupations than men do. So the union contract only helps you, if you're in the same job. If you're in different fields, then you have different contracts.
Right.
So occupational segregation is a huge problem, and that sort of steering to those differences in occupation happens super young in the life course, and we kind of see the construction of what girls should do and what boys should do happening really, really early. So that's one big problem.
So blame it on our parents then. It's all my parents' fault.
There you go.
And ultimately my fault when my kids grow up, so not good.
Right. So we'll have to have your kids on and we'll discuss how much at fault you are at.
Yeah, I'm sure their therapist in a couple of years will make a fortune off that.
So this occupational segregation is one big problem. But another problem is that there is job segregation within occupations. So let's look at doctors. That's a fairly privileged field, and people can make a good living, but there's a huge pay gap between doctors. So orthopedic surgeons make a lot more money than pediatricians do or internists do. And guess what? Women are more likely to be pediatricians than they are to be orthopedic surgeons. Let's take social work, a field that women dominate. Women are much more likely to be the face-to-face interacting with clients kinds of positions, men are more likely to be the administrators overseeing organizations positions. Guess which one pays more? The administrative position pays more. So these kinds of things, you have to have a pretty creative union contract to see these inequalities, and that doesn't always happen. Although unions have paid attention to this, and there was a movement it's in the 80s of comparable worth, trying to think through, really look at the job tasks that are involved in different jobs and trying to, correct for these inequalities. But certainly that movement was not, made great strides, but, wasn't perfect.
No, I mean, from my perspective, as someone who's been covered by a union contract, virtually all of my working life, the transparency of, this is the job you do, this is the wage you get, these are the benefits you get. Doesn't matter if you're a man, a woman, white, black, green, gay, straight, whatever, it doesn't matter. Whoever's doing that job, this is what it is. Absolute transparency, because it's written down in a book for everyone to see. For me, that's the way forward. So, in taking what I believe is the way forward, how do we address these problems? Because look, I've got 2 daughters. I don't want them to get cheated out of a lifetime of reasonable wages and equality. How do we get to that point? Is this government policy? Is this women demanding more? How do you see this?
I think there has to be a multi-pronged strategy here. So we need to do many things. We need the educational system, and I think we are making progress here, but we need the educational system to really have wide open eyes about the barriers that are gender-based, to, stop giving girls the feeling that they're not good in math, or, we got to get rid of that Barbie that says math is hard.
Well, hold on. Let me stop you there for a second.
Yeah.
You're a college professor. That means you're on the campuses a lot more than I am. I've read the statistics. There are more women in those fields than there are men, and there are more women on college campuses by far than there are men. And women are attaining degrees at much higher rates than men. Yeah,
there's been a huge switch. And it used to be that men had greater numbers of years of education, and now there's been a complete switch. And you're absolutely right that women are more likely to get a college degree. But there's still a fair amount of segregation in majors. So if you walk into an engineering classroom, you're likely to see a great gender imbalance in that classroom. And there are a lot more men in engineering. But although that is changing, so you're right, there is movement on all these fronts. But there's still work to be done in breaking down those barriers between fields that happens. They talk about this as the pipeline. You can't accuse the engineering firms of discrimination if there are no women engineers graduating. When there are women engineers graduating, then you can start looking at the engineering firms. Another issue is, what's called the glass ceiling, that women seem to kind of hit their heads on some kind of invisible ceiling within work organizations in terms of their ability to rise in the organization. And we also, a less well-known term, but one I like a lot, is the glass escalator that seems to help men rise to the top. Some of this has to do with really strange notions about what leadership is and who has authority, and what style of presenting oneself is seen as leadership. And there's a lot of talk about how women politicians are perceived versus male politicians, and that, when women are strong and say things forcefully, they're seen as unpleasant. I won't say other words. I won't say other words on your show of how women might be characterized. We'll go with unpleasant, whereas men are seen as strong and courageous and leaders, assertive, so reliable. So that's something that has to change. You did talk about the union contract being transparent. There are places, and there have been cases, where women are paid unequally for the same work. It's not always just, because of this occupational segregation I'm talking about. So there was the Lilly Ledbetter case that was really famous, that she'd worked for 30 years or some large number of years, and she found a note in her locker a secret note telling her that she had been paid less than her male colleagues for all of these years. And she looked into it, and she indeed had been. And I actually don't know for a fact. I would have to go look. I'm assuming she was not at a unionized workplace, but
she wasn't. She was management.
She was management, right? Absolutely, yes, you're right. So, and the statute of limitation, the discrimination was clear, but the statute of limitation had passed.
Right. No, Lilly Ledbetter is one of those things I get into trouble a lot about, because I think
how come?
I don't think it was a good piece of legislation. I think it solved one problem. It didn't solve all the problems, and that's all we got out of President Obama on the labor front. As where I wanted something better than the Employee Free Choice Act, which and my argument, before you jump all over me, and because women just get very angry about this, I think it's horrible that she was cheated. I would have preferred that she wasn't cheated, and I would have loved to have given her a pathway to not get cheated for 40 years out of wages, so that she wouldn't have to go back and try and find a lawyer who will possibly sue, and maybe you get some of it back. I would rather have the opportunity to ensure that you don't get cheated from the start, as opposed to giving you some kind of retroactive ability to go back and possibly sue, which is all Lilly Ledbetter actually did.
Well, I can't argue with you there. I certainly think that would be a goal in the end. But I certainly do think that, given we're not there, this is one piece of protection. I don't think you're going to get one piece of legislation that takes care of all of this. No. I think it's so multifaceted. Another huge problem is what's called the motherhood wage penalty. Motherhood is costly to women in terms of labor market outcomes, and mothers make less than childless women, whereas fathers make more than childless men. So there's a motherhood wage penalty and a fatherhood premium. And this, we could spend a lot of time talking about why those two things move in opposite directions. But I think,
I think part of it has to do with, this idea that we had in the 1950s of mom stays at home and raises the kids, and dad goes off to work, and you have this idea of a nuclear family. I think we're still trying to hold on to that. And trying to figure out how to. And look, I know when my wife and I had kids, we wanted to hold on to some idea that someone had to work, but someone still had to be home with the kids. And I still believe that that's the best way to go forward. I was hoping it was me who would be able to stay home and raise the kids. But sadly, just what we're talking about, her job didn't pay as much as mine did. So I had to go to work, and she stayed home. Now, I did find out after the fact that staying at home with the kids was a lot more work than I had ever envisioned, and I'm glad that she did it. But I wanted to try.
Yeah. Well, you were ahead of your time, and I'm sorry you didn't get that opportunity, because I think it is very rewarding to spend lots of time with kids, but it is a ton of work. And of course, as I know you know, and I know this is something you talk about, it's become extremely hard to be able to make that decision to have one parent home with kids, because it's really hard to make it on one income with all of the changes that have happened in our economy and the distribution of wealth across the income distribution. So that's, increasingly we have to have every adult worker in the labor market. So that's another problem. But, the motherhood wage penalty has to do with the fact that we do tend to have mothers be primary caretakers of children and do a greater share of child care, and that is costly for one's labor market rewards and advancement. But we also have kind of a cultural read of motherhood, and mothers are seen as less talented workers, but fathers are seen as more talented workers. There's something, again, this kind of goes back to what we were saying before about how the politicians are perceived. Fathers are seen as responsible, whereas mothers are seen as, having divided allegiances and thinking too much about the kids and not showing up every time the kid is sick, et
Yeah,
cetera.
do we want to change? Do we want that to change? I mean, I would rather have a situation where we're going, fathers take on some of that role, because I try with our children. I don't know that I want neither parent giving a rat's behind about the kids and their career comes first, but I don't know that I don't know that I'm going that far.
Uh-huh. Well, I think there are solutions where there's shared responsibility and both parents care about the kids, but there's more cooperative sharing of
or
the
just don't have them
responsibility for them.
That's probably the other idea.
Well,
so last question I've got for you, because
yeah.
I like to be someone who typical man. I want to fix things. And how do we fix this? Is this, are there a slew of policies, family leave, maternity care leave for men and women? How do you see this playing out to get to that? Is the Equal Rights Amendment part of this? What do you see as the way to get to where I think we all want to be, where everyone's treated equally and everyone has equal opportunities to move ahead and do better?
Yeah, well, I think you've already listed kind of the most important thing, and that is we need much better family policy in this country. We have almost no family policy in this country. So what we have, and we only got it in 1993, is the Family and Medical Leave Act, which gives 12 weeks of unpaid leave to workers who need to care for a child or a elderly parent or a sick family member. It's unpaid, it's short, and only 50% of the workforce is eligible because people don't work enough weeks in a year or they don't work for a big enough company to be eligible. So that's what we got on family leave. And then we have like zero systematic child care provision. So it's like every parent in America, and there's lots of parents in America, is kind of on their own frantically trying to figure out child care and to piece it together in this weird patchwork way that all parents do.
Yeah.
Our European peer nations, they're completely different on this front. Most of them have paid leave. The paid leave is longer. Many of the countries cover maternal and paternal leave. Some create incentives for men to take it to try to force more equality. They have organized state-funded child care, and this just makes it completely different. Now, it's not like they have no problems. Like the longer you give paid leave and the longer that women take it instead of men, the more women might have labor market negative outcomes. They might kind of get mommy tracked. But most research shows that doesn't kick in as a problem until about 10 months of leave. Or even a year. So we certainly could have much more generous paid leave, and that would make a huge difference. And then we didn't even really get into poverty, and I know we don't have time now, but we have a huge gender and children's poverty problem in this country, and we need much more policy that supports low-wage working women and their children. And the stimulus bill that Congress and President Biden just passed does have some very creative solutions on that front.
And that's a good step. Also, read the book, Ain't No Trust, How Bosses, Boyfriends, and Bureaucrats Fail Low-Income Mothers and Why It Matters, written by Judith Levine. We'll make sure we get links on it, how folks can take a look at that. Judith, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick. It was great.
Good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Hello, I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. A union of over 1.4 million strong and growing, AFSCME is gaining improvements in the workplace all across America. And right here in the Commonwealth, more than 95,000 AFSCME members make Pennsylvania happen. Highways, libraries, hospitals, parks, offices, prisons, classrooms, museums, courtrooms. You'll find AFSCME members at work in all these places and many more.
I make Pennsylvania happen every day.
I make Pennsylvania happen every day.
Today's AFSCME members take on public service jobs as diverse as they are, not for the recognition, but for a better Pennsylvania. For more information, please visit our website at AFSCME13.org. Labor is changing, so is your labor union. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
Hey you, get away from those polling places. We don't want your kind here. Scram! That's a stupid, shameful, and ultimately self-defeating political message, yet it's being pushed as the official anti-voter electoral strategy of Republicans. Admitting that they can't get majorities to vote for their collection of corporate lackeys, conspiracy theorists, and bigoted old white guys, the GOP hierarchy's great hope is to shove as many Democratic voters as possible out of our elections. They're banking on a blitz of bureaucratic bills they're now trying to ram through nearly every state legislature to intimidate, divert, and otherwise deny eligible voters their most fundamental democratic right. Their main targets are people of color, but they're also pushing to keep students, senior citizens, union households, and poor communities from voting. Unable to come up with any actual need for these autocratic restraints, the GOP vote thieves are fraudulently exclaiming that millions of illegal immigrants, dead people, Chinese, and even pets are voting. These absurd claims have been thoroughly investigated, even by Republican judges, committees, media, etc., and repeatedly they've been proven to be, well, absurd. Let's be blunt. You're more likely to find Bigfoot than you are to find a case of mass vote fraud in America. Even some GOP politicos have quit pretending that they're searching for the big cheat, instead bluntly making an overt right-wing ideological argument for subverting democracy. Everybody shouldn't be voting, explained Representative John Kavanaugh, the Republican chair of Arizona's election committee. Slipping deeper into doctrinaire doo-doo, he asserts that it's not just the number of votes that should matter in an election. We have to look at the quality of the votes, too. This is Jim Hightower saying, I'm guessing that most Democratic voters would fall into his low-quality category. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you lowdowners who subscribe to our monthly newsletter, The Hightower Lowdown. You know who you are. Thank you.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Well, the end of the month coming up, and look, I'm actually looking forward to the end of the month because the vote at Amazon will have taken place. The counting, that should be interesting. I'm actually guardedly optimistic by what I'm seeing coming out of Bessemer, Alabama. And if you would have asked me 2 months ago if I would be this guardedly optimistic, I would have said no. But I'll tell you, there's something going on that I'm, like I said, guardedly optimistic over, and here to share some thoughts on what's going on down in Alabama with the workers at the Amazon plant there in Bessemer, and maybe some thoughts on the tactics that are going on. Because look, Amazon is spending tons of money. In fact, as much social media as you can imagine, just hammering on the unions and hammering that the workers are all happy and it's a workers' paradise there. I've asked John Logan to come talk with us. John is a professor and director of labor and employment studies at San Francisco State University. His most recent piece, How Amazon's Anti-Union Consultants Are Trying to Crush the Labor Movement. John, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. I'm very glad to be on.
So, I'm like I said, I'm guardedly optimistic. I a couple of months ago, I gave this no chance whatsoever. Now I'm kind of like, this is kind of taking on a life, especially because Amazon is spending so much money. I mean, it's obscene the amount of money that they're spending to beat this back.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I mean, they're really throwing everything at it. They're spending millions. They've got two different anti-union consultant firms that we know about. They have a really expensive anti-union law firm. As you know, they've had a Twitter meltdown in the past few days, which has, really shows that the union campaign has been getting under its skin. And there are two remarkable things about the Twitter story, which might seem like a trivial issue. First, we didn't know what was going on. All of these bizarre tweets attacking the union, attacking Bernie Sanders, attacking Elizabeth Warren. And it later emerged, there was a story, it came out yesterday, I believe, that it was actually Jeff Bezos who insisted, he was very unhappy that they weren't going on the attack. It's all very Trumpian sounding, you gotta attack, lie, distort, say anything, resort to cyberbullying, to crass insults. And the second thing, when the tweets first started to emerge, they were so over the top, so ridiculous. The Amazon's own people suspected that maybe the account had been hacked and that someone was trying to make the company look bad. But it hadn't been hacked. I mean, these were official tweets coming, because of the orders of Jeff Bezos himself, within a couple of days of the election count. Now, I mean, if this was a person who was totally confident that the company was going to win, that this was just a minor inconvenience, that, it would be forgotten about within days, I can't imagine, that he would have this kind of reaction.
But there's part of me that goes, if you think about the Bezos mindset, this total domination mentality, that even as minor as this could be to them, it has to be crushed in the most overwhelming fashion possible. It has to be, just decimated so that they never try it again. They never have the audacity, because look, there are a number of unions. The Teamsters unions is looking at, trying to organize their drivers, because they understand that if Amazon can set up a system like Uber or Lyft to have independent contractors, people who are their own bosses, doing the job that UPS drivers are doing, UPS is done.
Yeah. And, they've read the stories about, how the campaign has already inspired workers across the country at Amazon and probably at other workplaces too.
Yep.
But, we know that over 1,000 Amazon workers have contacted the RWDSU and expressed an interest in forming a union at their workplaces. We know there's organizing going on in multiple places, in Staten Island, in Minneapolis, in Chicago, in Southern California, and Sacramento. The list gets longer and longer by the day. And, they're going to have to deal with all of this activism, no matter what the outcome of the vote. So, I like you, I'm sort of, remaining sort of cautiously hopeful. But, it would be an earthquake if the union wins this. And even if it comes up a little bit short, if this is a very close election, and who knows what might happen in terms of contested ballots, in terms of unfair labor. Because, again, I mean, you've been following this. There's actions that Amazon has committed during the course of the election campaign that I just cannot imagine would not be the subject of an unfair labor practice complaint. So, this might not be over for some time. And whatever happens, as you rightly said, it's not going away anytime soon for this company.
What it also has done is, Amazon is such a big company that it's highlighted, the kind of tactics that employers have been getting away with for a very long time. Right. None of this stuff is new. It's just now supersized. And there's some, little tweak things. I think we talked the last time. You said that they actually had the city change the stoplight patterns so that people could get out of the facilities faster, so that no one had a chance to talk to them. I talked with another person who said they got people walking around wearing sandwich boards, saying how horrible the union is. I mean, they're doing everything that they can possibly do, and I think people across the country are looking at this, going, "This is." I have the right to join a forming union, or at least I thought I did, or at least I should. So for me, this is a win-win. Even if they don't win the election, this has got to be something that changes people's minds and demands labor law reform, like I've been calling for 30 years.
No, 100% right. I mean, as you know, part of the problem, we may have discussed this last time, but the real problem is that it's always been impossible to have any kind of national dialogue about these issues. But this has given us that opportunity. I mean, the country is paying attention to what is happening in Bessemer. I mean, the coverage, you've been covering these issues for decades, but you know that they, by and large, they don't get covered by the mainstream media. And here we've had the most incredible coverage day after day after day. People are paying attention to what is happening. And because it's Amazon, and because, it's this union that has had the courage to take on one of the most powerful corporations, and these workers in Alabama, my goodness, how brave are they, to stand up against this company. Anyway, but as you said, it has been a gift, an opportunity to the labor movement, the likes of which I don't think they've had since the 1930s, And as you said, now, regardless of what the outcome is, and we're still hopeful, but regardless of what the outcome is, the thing now is we got to take advantage of this momentum. This has made, as you said, we've known for decades that these tactics are taking place, but people have not been exposed to them in the way that they've been exposed to them in this campaign. And so, it has made it real, has made it concrete. It has given the labor movement a language with which to explain to people, this is the problem, this is what happens. It says on paper, this is supposed to be a federally protected right, but then when you try to exercise that right, this is what you're subjected to. And, as you said, no one thinks these things are right. It's almost like, something that cuts across, partisan divisions. No one thinks that you should be harassed in the stalls of the restroom, No one thinks that, you should have people, who are being hired through a third-party agency, to be anti-union human billboards. No one thinks that you should get to install your own mailbox and have a camera surveilling it to see who's using it to vote in the election. No one thinks that Amazon should be able to change the pattern of the traffic lights to advantage it so that the union organizers who can't even get access to the workplace then can't get to speak to the workers as they come in the morning and they leave in the evening. This has ultimately presented an opportunity. And, it's also given the president, I think the opportunity to be the guy that he wanted to be, to speak up against this kind of intimidation and to call it out and to say, this is not right. And he wouldn't have been able to do that if it were not for the Amazon campaign. So as you said, I think there have been so many good things about this campaign, no matter what the eventual outcome.
And I think ultimately we have to have a conversation about working conditions. We always talk about wages and hours, and we always talk about benefits and all of those things. But working conditions, when I was doing some organizing work, it wasn't always about how much money you're getting paid or the health care or the retirement. It was how people were treated. And the stories that I hear from people who work for Amazon, the direct messages they send, the emails I get are they're treated like machines.
Yeah.
They don't get to go to the bathrooms, and they don't get to do things. So they can beat them all they want in the bathroom with the anti-union propaganda. They just can't go there because they're on a watch.
Yeah.
They're constantly being monitored. They're constantly being tracked. And, I look at it over the weekend, and I'm sure you saw it as well. A lot of people tweeted out the letter that Amazon had sent out, basically scolding their drivers for defecating in bags because they had nowhere to stop.
Right.
While, simultaneously saying, this doesn't ever happen.
Doesn't happen. Yeah. He said no one would work for us if that happened. And then, the evidence came out. It's been documented time after time after time. But as you said, yes, I mean, the conditions and the sort of constant surveillance, both the physical and the psychological pressure that those workers are under every second of the day that they're in those plants. And this is why they have, 100% turnover rates per year. I mean, Amazon says, these are good jobs. They pay $15 an hour and they have benefits. Well, we know now that $15 an hour is not so great, even for that area. It's lower than the median wage in the greater Birmingham area. It's lower than unionized warehouse jobs pay in Alabama. So it's not the great wage that Amazon says it is. But also, if the jobs were so great, people wouldn't be leaving them the way they're leaving them all the time.
No,
so,
I worked for a company called Roadway Express back in the 90s, through 2010. And, they were a good paying employer. Had the best healthcare coverage money could buy, had a good, solid, defined benefit pension plan, and their turnover rate, and this was a sales tool that they used. We have the best workers. We have a 1% turnover rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You had guys who they got jobs there. They didn't leave because it was a good job. Now you have said, and it is accurate. I've seen it in other places that in a year long, Amazon has nearly 100% turnover. That means everyone they hired January 1st is gone by the next January 1st. Whereas a company like Roadway Express, when they were in business, 1%.
Yeah. And these jobs don't have to be crappy jobs. I mean, we know this, you actually can treat people with decency and respect. You can give them a voice over their working conditions. But again, as we discussed before, Amazon is so ideologically attached to this sort of unilateral control of the workplace.
That's just not Amazon, though, John.
Yeah, no, I know. But they even more, there's this sort of fantasy out there that, these are like, these woke liberal tech companies, they're enlightened and, they have these sort of open corporate cultures. But, when it comes to unions, when it comes to actually having to give people a voice at the workplace, if anything, they're more ideologically opposed than, just your regular American employer. It's something they're going to have to deal with. It's not going away. They've spent millions of dollars trying to defeat one campaign in Alabama, but they're going to be faced with a lot more campaigns after this one.
I hope you're right. But, back to your point there a second ago, because, even the left-leaning places who are out there saying, oh, no, we believe in unions, when it comes to them being organized, they fight tooth and nail. And, like the Young Turks, I mean, there was an organizing campaign going on there, and man, the guy who was the leader of it fought it tooth and nail. Because they don't want to give up that control. And this isn't, to me, ideological. This goes back to the original war between capital and labor. Capital never wants to relinquish any control. They want desperate, poverty-ridden workers that are exploitable so they can make profit off of it. They don't want equal footing.
No. But, the pandemic, too, the context of the pandemic has really sort of exposed the sort of, absolutely, indecent and indefensible inequality that we're talking about here. I mean, Bezos and Amazon, in terms of in rewarding their workers, investing the enormous profits that they have made, along with Elon Musk. Jeff Bezos is the world's largest pandemic profiteer, and they're also the two world's largest, richest individuals. But in terms of giving something back to the workers, in terms of hazard pay, in terms of paid sick leave, in terms of providing proper PPE and proper safety precautions that would have protected them from infection, they've done a terrible job, and they know that.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that. And so I think the fact that this has taken place at Amazon during the pandemic in the context of the Black Lives Matter protests, it all just has, is, and in the context of a new administration that is not afraid to come out and support unions and the right to a free and fair choice, and to call out the bullying and the intimidation tactics of Amazon. I think all of that has contributed to an atmosphere where this is going to be a good thing for the labor movement, no matter what.
Yeah, I'm with you. Do we know when the vote stops? Do we know when the votes are going to be counted? Do we have an idea of when we're going to find out how this plays out?
That, as you know, that's a sort of complicated question.
Right.
So it starts at 10 a.m. Central Time tomorrow, I think. And the NLRB count starts at that time, but there could be votes challenged on either side. People who voted for the union. Amazon probably likely to say this person doesn't work here anymore, that person doesn't work here. There could be challenges for people who should have been ineligible because of their job classification, their supervisors, whatever it is. So there could be challenges on both sides, and it partly depends on how close a vote is and whether or not the challenge ballots have the potential of swinging the result, one way or the other. If it's a very clear vote, we'll probably find out sometime tomorrow. We don't know what time exactly. Even then, it could be Wednesday, because they're having a part of the count that's only open to the parties and to press who are writing for on the count for a particular publication. They're then having a public part of the meeting. But they say they haven't given a time for that. They said it will either be later on Tuesday or possibly even on Wednesday. So, my guess is that we may not know right away. And, if the challenges are, it's a very close vote and there's a lot of challenges, it could potentially take several weeks actually until we know the final outcome. And also, as you know, both sides have 7 days to file unfair labor practice charges. And you could actually get unfair labor, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if Amazon files charges against the RWDSU.
I fully expect it.
There'll be totally frivolous charges, but I still expect that the company will do it because they've done everything else in the course of this campaign. As we mentioned, there have been so many things that Amazon has done that we've never really seen before. Even to people like us who follow these issues, there have been so many, new and devious and dirty tricks that have gone on, in terms of the anti-union campaign. I would be amazed if there's not the potential for unfair labor practice charges filed by the RWDSU. So again, as you know, this can be a slow process. The administrative law judge has to investigate, to decide if there's merit in the charges. I guess, it depends, obviously we want a clear victory for the union. If it's a disputed outcome, we want it not to go to the full board until Biden has been able to get a Democratic majority on the board. So
I'm right there with you.
So anyway.
We'll see how it plays out. And on the other side of this, I'd love to have you come back and share some thoughts. Because, look, this is, regardless of what the outcome is, this is now the test case for every organizing campaign going forward. The dirty 100%. Tricks that we'll be examining going into the future will become the new normal, especially if they're successful.
Yeah. But absolutely. And as you said earlier, it should also be Exhibit A when it comes to the case for the PRO Act. I mean, this is just, what we need to hammer on about. It says on paper, you have this, it's supposed to be a federally protected right. Here's what happens when workers actually try to exercise that right. I mean, it should be turned into hearings day after day, to be told that, they should bring people up there and, so they can explain exactly what they were forced to listen to
from your lips. And let's hope that happens. But John, again, I appreciate the time. I hope you'll come back and share some more thoughts with us as this wraps up and as we move forward. Thanks so much.
Okay. Happy to be on, Rick. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Good stuff. John Logan, professor and director of labor and employment studies there at San Francisco State University. Also a good friend of the show. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day the U.S. Supreme Court issued its ruling on the case West Coast Hotel versus Parrish. The ruling upheld a progressive law that established minimum wages for women. An example of protective legislation, it intended to guard health, safety, and morals of women workers. Elsie Parrish had been a chambermaid at the Cascadian Hotel in Wenatchee, Washington until 1935. She sued and won at the state level after she was paid far below the state's minimum wage. The parent company, West Coast Hotel, appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. They argued the Progressive-era law violated the constitutional right of individuals to freely contract with one another. This interpretation was common during the court's Lochner era. The 1905 Lochner v. New York ruling against maximum hours for bakers ushered in a period of anti-labor Supreme Court rulings. Parrish is considered the landmark case that brought an end to that era. The court argued that the Constitution does not speak of freedom of contract and added, quote, the exploitation of a class of workers who are in an unequal position with respect to bargaining power is not only detrimental to their health and well-being, but casts a direct burden for their support upon the community. What these workers lose in wages, the taxpayers are called upon to pay. The case is also considered instrumental in the switch in time to save nine. It was a reference to Justice Owen Roberts' surprising shift in favor of Parrish. This occurred just as President Roosevelt finalized plans to increase the number of Supreme Court justices to 15. Though Parrish did not overturn Lochner, it did mark a period of pro-labor rulings. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I look at the Amazon situation and understand. I go back to my own experience. I worked in a warehouse years ago, back in '88. And I remember it was the same kind of setup as an Amazon facility. You had pickers, you had, shipping and receiving people. It was a big hardware chain. It was their distribution center. So what they did is they picked orders for these big hardware stores in every little community. And, you loaded them in the trucks and everything was by hand. And I remember, as John was talking, I was thinking about my experience there. And you go back to 1988 and you think about, I started off at nearly $7 an hour. which would be, well over 50. I think it was like 16 something now. Top rate was like $10 an hour, which was, like $27 an hour now, with health care that I didn't have to pay for. And it was a reasonable, wasn't great, but it was a reasonable defined benefit pension plan. Now this is 1988. Amazon right now is touting the fact that they pay $15 an hour. I was making $10 an hour well over 30 years ago with good health care and a reasonable pension. In that span, you're talking about just an actual dollar for dollar $5 raise. And they're touting that as a good job. The fact that they have nearly 100% turnover in a lot of these facilities, and they're churning through people. You hear these reports all the time. It says that they're not great jobs. And look, back then you didn't have the kind of control that you have now. The quotas weren't anywhere near as high as they are now, especially in a union environment in which I worked. I hear some of these horror stories, and it's just, my mind goes back to this moment where, as a union person, and this isn't, look, I've got my problems with the Republican Party. I've got my problems with the Democratic Party. Look, the 90s Clinton era, I didn't think Carter was particularly great for working people either. Still better than the alternatives, but not by a lot. During those years, we lived off of what our grandparents built, which was a strong workplace of people who had, contracts and had, expectations of overtime after 8 hours and had expectations of good health care. I look at some of the health care that people have, and I'm going, my goodness, how is it you can survive with this? And that's all we're doing as a working class, just surviving. And this is where the frustrating part in this is for me, because, I'm a believer in, if we had union density at 20%, 25%, a lot of our problems would be non-existent. Wages would not be this pathetically low. We would have a much better, a much stronger working class, with better benefits, with better, retirement security. What's happened is, and this Amazon example is a perfect scenario to look at. This is the most profitable company in the world. They have the wealthiest person almost in the history of civilization as their top guy. For now, I guess he's stepping aside. And yet $15 an hour is considered a good wage. $16 an hour is considered a good wage. I go back and I think about, and I use the Bureau of Labor Statistics inflation calculator quite often, and you should too, because it gives you a good comparison of, I was making, $10 an hour back in, 1988. How much is that in today's dollars? And it gives you the ability to look back and go, how much was my cost of living? How much did I make in today's dollars back then? How well off was I? Like I said, I made $10 an hour back in 1988. In today's dollars, that's $22.73. So when I was at that job, it was like making $22 an hour today. That is not a bad wage. And that is a wage that Amazon could pay and should be paying, with health care and retirement security. But instead, what we've done is we've said, no, you workers don't deserve that. You're not worth that, because it's a meritocracy after all. Jeff Bezos needs the money. The investor class needs the money. Again, this isn't political. This is the war between capital, the moneyed interest, the ownership class, and the rest of us. And no matter where you are on the working class spectrum, whether you have a college degree or you don't, it still comes down to the bottom line being the moneyed interests have their interests at heart, and they're not yours. There are no benevolent employers. Nothing is given to you out of the goodness of someone's heart. It's demanded. It's fought for. It's negotiated for. And that's why I'm such a big proponent of people joining and forming unions, to have that ability to say, this is how much we made. I want a share of that profit. Make as much as you can off my labor, but I want a share of it. Just my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Do you think the Amazon workers in Alabama are going to vote to join the union? Or do you think, as some have told me, they're going to get crushed? I think it's going to be a lot closer than crushed, but I am, like I said, guardedly optimistic. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
It's not really recyclable. And that means that it ends up in landfills or burnt or in the ocean where it breaks down into microplastics, gets eaten by fish, and can end up inside us.
Plastic pollution increasingly found in oceans, farm soils, and the food chain. The fossil fuel industry receives more than $60 billion a year in indirect federal subsidies, study finds. Oil firms knew decades ago fossil fuels caused deadly air pollution and then lied about it. Plus, one tanker mishap causes global oil price spike.
All of those mishaps and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
The reason I am so happy is that science is back.
Yay, science is back. Come for the bad jokes, stay for the good science. This is your Green News Report. Okie dokie, speaking of good science, hello Desi Doyen.
Hey.
We start off today with a worldwide oil price spike because of one lousy ship. Really?
Yes. Global oil prices spiked temporarily after a massive container ship ran aground in the Suez Canal in the Middle East on Wednesday, halting all traffic in one of the world's busiest waterways. It's your daily reminder that solar and wind energy cannot be disrupted by a single poorly navigated ship halfway across the world.
Yeah, but it can be disrupted by nightfall.
That's what batteries are for.
Oh, good point. See? Good science.
Meanwhile, a new study has estimated just how much the U.S. fossil fuel industry receives in government subsidies. Now, direct subsidies, like tax breaks, are estimated to be up to about $50 billion a year. But researchers at Yale University estimate that indirect subsidies are far higher and allow fossil fuel companies to offload onto society the full, true costs of their products. Costs like pollution, public health damages, and climate change, known as externalities. Between 2010 and 2018, the study estimates the value of these indirect, implicit subsidies to the U.S. fossil fuel industry averaged about $62 billion every year.
Really? And yet we're just so broke, apparently, according to Republicans, that they can't afford to give any money to the solar and wind industry.
The Guardian reports that a new treasure trove of internal documents shows that oil companies knew decades ago that burning their product caused deadly, toxic air pollution.
Of course. What do you think we give them all that money for?
But like the tobacco industry, the documents show oil companies spent millions to generate uncertainty about the effects of their toxic air pollution, denying the fact that their products posed grave risks to public health, and spent millions lobbying to block clean air rules.
I wonder where they got all that money.
But as the world begins to shift away from fossil fuels, the oil and gas industry is pushing to flood the world with more plastics made from oil and gas in order to maintain their profits. And that would increase plastic pollution. A series of alarming studies reveal that plastic pollution is entering the food chain. UC Santa Barbara scientist Roland Geyer explains in an interview with CBS.
Plastic in the ocean has a tendency to break down into ever smaller pieces. And these tiny pieces then get taken up even lower down in the food chain. So we know that it ends up on our dinner plates. There is plastic in your food, plastic in your sea salt, and there is plastic coming out of your tap.
Delicious.
And it's not just entering and rising up the ocean food chain. A new study has concluded that teeny tiny microplastics are even contaminating agricultural soils on land. The researchers were surprised to find that tiny plastic particles were small enough to pass through the physical barriers of intact plant tissue, negatively impacting plant development and could be ending up in produce and people. They estimate that more microplastics are contaminating farm soils than oceans. In the U.S., Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon introduced the comprehensive Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act to reduce plastic pollution and address the entire life cycle of plastics. The bill also prioritizes environmental justice because most plastic manufacturing plants are, surprise, located in communities of color, like a massive new plastic plant now being proposed in a primarily black community in Louisiana known as Cancer Alley because of the high incidence of cancer. HBO's John Oliver did an epic report on plastic pollution in his show Last Week Tonight, exposing how the plastic packaging industry and the oil industry lobbied to put the burden on consumers to dispose of plastic waste rather than the producers of plastic waste. But it turns out that the vast majority of plastic packaging cannot be recycled. We'll link to that video at our website, greennews.bradblog.com. Plastic pollution is another way that the oil industry is trying to force consumers, governments, and taxpayers to bear the oil industry's burden of the waste and pollution they generate. Effectively, another subsidy for the fossil fuel industry. Nice work if you can get it.
Indeed. For much more on that story and all of the other things we couldn't cover today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
You know, I got to tell you, I go back to the beginning of the show of that Ted Cruz clip. I'm just incensed that the fact that you've got Ted Cruz going down to the border, and infant babies being nursed in pens, and like, oh my gosh, this is just happening. Like, he's just discovered that we have a problem on the southern border. And not that the fact that he was a big part of why it's so bad, but like he's Steve Irwin, he's the Crikey guy discovering something. Like he's Magellan discovering something, at midnight on our border. Just despicable human being. I'm hoping Texas, is that what you want as the face of your state? Sad and scary stuff. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day, our good friend, former Ohio Congressman and political analyst, Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick.
Did you see the video that Ted Cruz put out of himself investigating the border crisis?
It was the Cruz documentary. It was a nature documentary, is what they actually called it. Over in England, they called it the wildlife documentary. He had a professional photographer, of course. And,
yeah.
Shared his journey as only Senator Ted could. And then he had how about the fishing shirt and the baseball cap? It was kind of all matching.
Yeah, he got that in Cancun.
Yeah, you just took my joke. I was going to say it had a flag of Texas, but not Cancun on it.
Yeah.
No,
I mean. And this is the part that gets me, and this is what's frustrating to me, because our politics has turned into this weird place where now everything that's going on the border is all because of Joe Biden, and Joe Biden did all this. And look, I'm not defending the Democrats or the Republicans or anybody in this, but you cannot be in Congress as long as Ted Cruz or Susan freaking Collins and go down to that border at midnight and say, oh my gosh, look what we've just uncovered, and pretend like you're breaking some kind of story when you've sat for years and done absolutely nothing but make it worse, and now proclaim that you're Magellan discovering new lands.
Well, if you look at the surge, for example, with children, it still hasn't the border situation now still hasn't reached the high that it had in 2019. When Trump was president.
Right.
It had and if you look at the stats on this now, look, no matter what happens, at some point in time, of course, this whole situation is going to be owned by a new administration. Of where it goes, and then of course, if they try to get something, with a piece of legislation with the Senate, it's not going to happen anyway. So there's not going to be much of a solution. So it's going to be, internal as to what the administration will want to do. But the stats don't lie if you look at them as to the fact that, I'll go back to 2019 again. It was way beyond what's going on now.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is everyone's pointing fingers. It's and look, it's all your fault. It's everyone's fault. So how about we do this instead of having the mockumentary that Ted Cruz just made, wasting the resources on that? How about we actually go to work and get something done so that we can address this? Because look, it's only going to get worse, especially as climate change continues to ravage areas in South America. We're going to have massive refugee crisis at some point, and we better figure out how to handle this stuff.
Sure. I mean, and you're right. And that's what I was saying again, as far as, a new president eventually, after a certain period of time, then the administration will own what happens, whether it's, something that doesn't go right or whether it's something that goes right. So they're going to have to eventually try, I think, to get something through. And again, good luck with that in the Senate.
Yeah, again, it's all about rewriting history and learning which side of the victim card they're on today. Anyway, let's move along. Coronavirus. 60 Minutes did an interesting piece on Sunday. We're still arguing over where this originated. I know a lot of my fans of the former guy love to call it the China virus, and I've got friends on the other side who say it's horribly racist. And I'm in this place where if it originated in China, that it's a virus that came from China. I get the arguments on the left, but where did it originate, and what was the cause? Do we or will we ever know?
Well, part of the problem we're going to have is that with the and look, right out front, I don't trust the Chinese government. I've dealt with the Chinese government up close and personal. When I was in D.C. and we tried to do something with the trade situation with China, and we just hit these brick walls. So when the World Health Organization got involved, and they had this, what I call the guided tour in China. And so I don't know how accurate it can be, because China will manipulate, what it wants to in the facts of it. So I think it came from Wuhan. There's questions in this recent, quote, investigation by the WHO, which again, like I said, I think was more of a guided tour. Yeah. And that's why I think there's still questions lingering. It was a guided tour. Yeah.
Is there any way to hold them accountable? I know the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, didn't want to answer questions on how we deal with that, if we can punish them. Is there any way of holding them accountable for this, or is this just what it is?
There is a way. One way is for because this went around the world, and I have friends in a lot of countries, and they talk about feelings that China is responsible, and it's not limited to the United States. But I think that when you look at what Blinken did, in the sense of how he answered it, was he doesn't know yet what they want to do. I mean, he could have come out and said, we're going to get them tomorrow. Well, you're going to get them how? I think the Biden approach is international, so I think the options are being held open by the Secretary of State. And the one thing that can be done is to work through, a process with other countries, United Nations, et cetera. We can't go this one alone.
Right. Now, is this an opportunity? Because, I'm looking at our standing around the globe. We've fallen a bit, and the Chinese have tried to fill that void. Is this an opportunity for the U.S. to reassert itself on the global stage by, because we are doing a really good job of getting people vaccinated? Is this the opportunity to, to start, going and helping the rest of the world become vaccinated?
Yes, I mean, vaccination diplomacy. If you look at what China's doing, 60% of its vaccines have been exported, which does baffle me. Of China is taking a very laissez-faire attitude about, well, we'll vaccinate our people, but we'll go ahead and just export the majority of their vaccine, which is what they're doing. And again, Rick, that kind of puzzles me of how is China not worried about vaccinating their people. But for us, taking it back to your question, yes, it's a chance for us to do two things. One, to gain some goodwill and to do humanitarian help, and the second, it's a little bit selfish, I guess, for every country in the world. But if we don't vaccinate, the rest of the world where they're having trouble, for example, parts of Africa where nobody's been vaccinated, then it's going to come back to haunt us. It'll be less ability for the world to interact, for travel. Business, etc. So I think it really behooves us to have some what I call vaccine diplomacy.
Yeah,
it's good.
Now, look, I'm not a globalist. I'm not someone who thinks that we need to take over the world, but right. I would rather us be the leader than the Chinese. And this is the kind of world that we're heading towards. I mean, we're racing back towards another Cold War, and I would argue we've been in one for a very long time. We're just now realizing that we're in it. After for so long going, oh no, we're friends, which is kind of weird.
No, and I agree with you. And we're quick to jump into the Middle East in the last 25 years. We're very quick to do that. Well, let's be quick to get some goodwill and do something to jump in different parts of the world where we can, and we can with the vaccines. Right. We can do it and still take care of ourselves.
And finally, I wanted to get your thoughts on the filibuster. Chuck Schumer, the reports are coming out that he thinks he has found the magic bullet. He's found the way around Joe Manchin. He's figured it out. Is that accurate?
Well, maybe he thinks he has, but he has one thing is exactly what he has. If you look at reconciliation, and people are like, well, what is that? Well, reconciliation was created because there are moments you don't have to have the cloture, the 60 votes out of the 100. And one of the processes, because right now it's applied to judges in certain cases, approvals, but one of the processes is reconciliation, and it's spelled out, and it's used once or twice a year, but it relates to the budget and that vote. So I think it's sort of the article that I read today is a hyper situation in a sense of it's being hyped up. One more act of reconciliation, making it 3 times that Senator Schumer will be able to implement the 50 only, I call it. Right. That's not the end of the world solution. It's not even the beginning. I mean, they're going to have to eventually address this head on, and I understand they have a problem with Senator Manchin, on it. And yes, I guess you get one more round, so you get 3 votes, but that's certainly it's not a path of light in this process.
Now, I was thinking about this from a different perspective because you and I have had conversations on this, on the budget in the past, and you've enlightened us that there are a number of bills, I guess 13 that you have to pass, right?
Well, yes, and that's critical because they have not passed a budget in. I'm going to try to do a memory thing here. 15 years.
Right.
They haven't actually, they say budget, they haven't passed it. There's 13 appropriation bills. They're passed one by one on the floor of the House, sent to the Senate, and then passed one by one, or wrapped together in reconciliation, and it becomes the budget.
So the question that I had, since there are 13 of them, could you not do 13 budget reconciliations on each one of those and tie something to each one of those 13?
Well, that's interesting. if they would like. That's very interesting. In fact, you might want to call Senator Schumer's office if they would follow the process that used to be followed, where each appropriation bill comes up. Correct. It's almost like you would have 13 budget votes.
Yeah, I mean, that's just something when I saw that story, I'm going, well, I remember talking to my buddy Bob, and he said 13. I go, 13 sounds like a number I can deal with. Now, the flip side of this is, if you open this door, the Republicans can do the exact same thing.
Well, yes. I mean, the whole key to this filibuster and Senate rules, if they can't agree because now the Republicans want to keep the filibuster and the Democratic side's a little afraid because if it gets in the minority, it wants to keep it, they need to have a vote where they determine in 4 years from now, I know that staves everything off for 4 years, but in 4 years from now, here's what we're going to implement, or 2 years from now, no matter who's running the Senate.
Yep. No. I mean, I want to get rid of it because I think majority should rule.
Right.
But I know there are a lot of people. No. We can't stop buying things, and I'm like, maybe that's what democracy is all about.
Well, here's the point. You get rid of it, and then what needs to happen is the Democratic Party needs to say, look, in these following 3 states, 4 states, 5 states, we have Senate elections. You really need to step up to the plate so we have more numbers. And the Republican Party, on the reverse of that, needs to say, we need more seats. You don't acquire more seats by trying to use a rule in case you don't acquire seats, if that makes sense.
No, I'm right there with you. You acquire more seats by doing what they did in Georgia, stopping people from voting.
Well, yeah, of course, that's what they're. Well, good point. That's what they're trying to do. Instead of of trying to win seats, they're trying to fix the system so they win seats, which usually doesn't work.
Well, we'll see. But maybe we will call Chuck Schumer up and suggest 13. 13's the magic number.
They will call it the Rick Smith Reconciliation Act. Now,
there you go.
You got to suggest that to them.
In fact, I'm gonna tweet that to Chuck as we speak.
There you go.
But Bob, I appreciate the time as always. Good stuff, my friend.
Thank you, Rick.
It's something we had talked about in the past. The idea that a budget, if you were actually to pass one, and as he pointed out, we haven't done and so in a long time. There are 13 bills, appropriation bills that I think you should be able to pass each one individually. And look, I'm just a dumb truck driver, and I've dreamt this up. How come Chuck Schumer and the rest of them, who have teams of lawyers, can't figure this stuff out? But ultimately, and I've been on getting rid of the filibuster for a while. This is why elections matter. And if you have the ability to get things done, Republicans come out with a lot of bad ideas. They really do, and they sound great. Until you put them into practice and you realize, we're screwed. Then maybe you have the chance to go back and fix those. Now, the fear is always, and this has been the fear of the Democrats, and I have this fear of becoming a banana republic where we try and fix the bad idea. A couple years later, even worse idea, try and fix that, to where we keep doing what we've been doing for the last 40, 50 years, is move from a place where we had a strong middle class, strong economic activity in the working class of this country, and corporate America has slowly moved us to a corporate agenda, has slowly moved, negotiation after negotiation, us over to, where we are now, which is, thinking that $15 an hour is somehow a good job. Thinking that, a high deductible, high risk insurance plan is somehow a good thing to have. Instead of going, no, we need those good union jobs that I remember as a kid, that, were plentiful and that supported a family. And, I think of our conversation earlier with Judith Levine. It would be a whole lot easier for families to exist if they had the option of one income, if they had the option of two people making a really good income and not having to work as many hours. Look, I'm all in favor of giving people options. And that comes back with having a decent share of the pie. And an ability to support oneself. I go back to, and I didn't get into this with Judith Levine earlier, but I go back to my childhood. My mother was a single mother. The 70s were not a good time for women workers or single women with children workers at all. It was poverty, desperation, wages. It was last one hired, first one fired. It was bad. And we can do better. We can. And this is where I, as someone who believes in unions, think that's a start. That's a start to moving us down that road. And it's the direction I think we need to go, which, as we said earlier, I'm looking forward to the decision, hopefully tomorrow. Hopefully there's a big decision of a victory down at Amazon and Bessemer, so that maybe there's a wave that goes across this country of people who are going, hey, we can do this. We can actually achieve better. We can actually have better lives. And that frame that I remember as a kid, union job equals better life, is something that my kids and my grandkids also think of. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to be an interesting week. Infrastructure, the Amazon vote, lots of stuff on the horizon. If you missed any of today's program, however, you can download the podcast there at the website. You can get the app on your smartphone, take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show.